Hello and welcome back to the Richardson Lectures on the challenge of resource management. In the last few videos we've been looking at the first part of the unit on an overview of resource management, looking at global patterns of resources and then focusing on energy, water and food resources in the UK. We're now moving on to part 2, which is actually the options part of the unit, where you can choose in the exam between food resources, water resources or energy resources questions. In this series of videos I'm going to be focusing on food resources. So our first lesson of food resources is going to be looking at a global food supply. We need to be able to describe global patterns of calorie intake and food production. These feature quite heavily as exam questions in the exam, where we're given some data response questions, where we're given maps of either world or particular regions and asked to describe and comment on those. And we'll see some of those at the end of this video. And then we also need to explain the reasons for increased food consumption. So a bit of an introduction then. It is generally accepted that there is enough food in the world to meet the needs of the current population. However, the distribution of that food is uneven, with some countries having very high consumption rates of food and also waste, whilst other countries, often the very poor countries, have significant problems with food insecurity. They do not have enough supply of reliable, nutritious food, and that causes a significant imbalance in the world. Interesting, this little cartoon here is showing how actually the Western wealthy countries are actually using some food in order to power their cars through producing biofuels, whereas we've still got some people in the world who don't have enough food to eat. So first of all, we'll take a look at global calorie intake, and we've got a world map, a choropleth map to show this. Choropleth maps are quite commonly seen in the exam questions in this unit, where data is represented for a whole country using a colour and a key. Now, the recommended daily calorie intake is between 2,000 and 2,400 calories. However, that does vary significantly across the world. On our key here, we've only got one measure, the lightish yellow, which is showing below 2,400, but some of those countries will have significantly less than that as well. So when we get graphs like this, we should be, maps should I say, we should be looking at general trends, specific countries and any kind of exceptions. So when we think about overall patterns, it's clear that the high income countries in North America and Europe have the highest calorie intake. Specifically the United States and Canada, France can be seen there, Germany, with that very high calorie intake. And it's actually the countries in low income countries, in particular in Central and Southern Africa, and some here in Asia with Mongolia and India being examples there, where we've got food calorie intake that is much lower. Now there are a couple of exceptions to that trend. We're talking about Africa as being a low calorie intake continent, whereas there are some countries, South Africa, Egypt, Libya in the north there, where calorie intake is higher, 2,850 to 3,269 calories, okay, per head, per day. We'll now look at this map showing global food production. So the pattern of food supply is also uneven, and we can see that on this map, which is showing the value of food produced in billions of dollars. And we can see there are some similar patterns. North America and Europe and other high-income countries being examples of countries that are producing high values of food. The United States being a good example there, but also China and India in Asia showing high values of food production. And Africa again stands out as this low-income region generally, where we've got the lowest food production taking place on the planet. We'll now look at these two maps side by side. What we can see is that generally where we've got high calorie intake, United States as an example, we've also got high food production. And where we've got low calorie intake, mainly across Africa, we've got low food production. But there are a couple of exceptions, and a really good example of that is India, where we've actually got very low calorie intake per head, but actually the highest food production value in US billions. And that's interesting. What it suggests is that actually a lot of the food is being exported from India to other parts of the world, and or within the population, the majority of people are having a very low calorie intake, and maybe just a few people are having much higher consumptions of calories. Now let's take a quick look at this map. This shows food insecurity, which is when you've got a lack of reliable supply of nutritious food. And we can see a clear pattern on this map. Again, Africa standing out there as the main region within the world where we've got extreme food insecurity. Much of Africa comes under that category, with the exceptions of the far south in South Africa and the far north. And generally, it's our highest income countries, Australia, New Zealand, North America with Canada and the United States, and much of Europe, which have very low levels of food insecurity. So we can see on this map in particular that clear imbalance in the world. Now, another challenge in terms of food supply is that actually we've got increased food consumption in the world, and that's down to two main reasons. The first one's population increase. As the global population increases, there is increased need for a higher food production, as well as water and energy, in order to meet the needs of those people. In 2011, the global population reached 7 billion, and it's predicted to continue to rise until at least the middle of this current century. Now, world population has grown rapidly. It was only back in the 1950s when we had just over 2 billion people, and by 2011 it had rocketed up to 7 billion, and it's continuing to grow at present. These predictions on here show various scenarios. Some are suggesting that we're going to grow at least, in fact they're all suggesting we're going to grow at least until 2050, with the lowest scenario then suggesting that the population will start to decrease after 2050, whereas the highest scenario is actually showing that the population will continue to rise rapidly up right until the end of the century, reaching possibly 14 billion, and that would put real pressures on food production in ensuring there is enough food for that population. However, the population growth is not even, and this is where the problem is more significant. In fact, it's the areas with the highest food insecurity, Africa, we mentioned from the maps previously, which has actually got the highest population growth rate, 2.6% per year of population growth in Africa, compared to Europe's just 0.1% growth. So this rapid population growth taking place in Africa over the next sort of 30-40 years, and actually it's the area that needs the most food. It's got the highest levels of food insecurity. Now, another reason for increased food consumption is the economic development that's taking place across the world, because the wealth of a country and its population is also important in its food consumption. And generally, richer, more developed countries, we find that people are consuming more food, often more than they actually need. So as countries continue to develop, we're going to see those countries consuming per head more food. In addition to the amount of food people are consuming, it's also the types. Because what we find is that as countries develop, they tend to eat more meat and other animal-based products. And the problem with that is, in order to produce meat, grains and other crops are used to feed those animals. And alarmingly, to produce 1 kilogram of beef, it uses approximately 7 kilograms of grain. Now that's grain that could be used to feed the population. And we can see that happening in the typical Chinese diet. China, an example of one of those rapidly developing countries. We can see we've got two time periods here from 1969 to 2009, and we can actually see that the percentage of animal products in the Chinese diet has increased from just over 6% back in 1969 to 22% by 2009, and that's predicted to continue to increase. So that increased shift towards meat consumption is putting more and more pressure on global food supplies. Okay, we'll finish off then by looking at a couple of exam questions. We've given here figure 11. This is quite typical in this paper to see these choropleth maps. Figure 11 is a map of South and East Asia showing the percentage of people who were undernourished between 2014 and 2016. And the first question, it says, name one country where less than 5% of the population were undernourished, 1 mark. So it's a simple state based on the data question, so we need to be able to use our key. Less than 5% undernourishment is yellow, and we've got a selection of countries on here that are yellow, so we need to read one of those off and write one down. You could have had Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, or the small country of Brunei. Next, a two-part question worth 2 marks. It says, how many of the Asian countries shown in figure 11 had 15 to 24.9% of their population undernourished? So again, this first part is a multiple choice. We're given 4 options. So we're interested in the 15 to 24.9%, which is the orange. You then need to count those countries up, and the answer is 8. So we've got Afghanistan and Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos and Mongolia. And then the second part of the question says, what percentage of the 24 countries in Asia for which data is shown had 15 to 24.9% of their population undernourished? Answer to 1 decimal place. Important we do that to get the mark. So for that, we've been given we know we've got 8 countries that fall into that category out of a total 24. So 8 divided by 24 times 100 gives you 33.3% recurring. Just leave that at 33.3% to get the mark. And then lastly, we've been asked to describe the distribution of the countries which had 15 to 24.9% of their population undernourished, as shown in figure 11. So we wanted to describe some overall trends and patterns here. Now, I'll be honest, there's not a lot that really jumps out in terms of general trends, but we need to be able to start picking out some smaller patterns in the data. So we're after kind of 2 simple points, or perhaps 1 developed point here. Here are some examples. The biggest area is in South Asia, so the southern parts of Asia, where we've seen the countries in that percentage bracket. The largest group of countries are south of China, and we could give some examples: Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar. And then most of them share a border, so Afghanistan and Pakistan. The only 2 that don't have borders are Sri Lanka, the island nation, and Mongolia to the north. So some rather basic patterns, but using those specific countries in our answer here. Okay, that's it for this video. Next time we'll be looking at the factors that affect food supply.